tied a towel around himself, around his waist. And he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet and wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. All right, what's Jesus doing? Well, this is common practice in first century Israel at the time of Jesus. If you were in an affluent household, or you were visiting an affluent household, when you showed up at that home, because you traipsed everywhere, come sun, wind, rain, or snow, and you did so in Birkenstocks, your feet would be a disaster. And so, at this affluent house, a servant of the house, a slave owned by the master of the house, would gather you in the entryway of the home or on the patio of the home, and they would bring out a basin of water and a towel, and they would have you remove your sandals, and they would wash your feet. And it was even kind of like a foot massage, because they would use oils and perfumes, and they would relax your feet from walking the long distance of your trip. Okay, but Jesus and none of his guys were affluent, other than Matthew the tax collector. Well, in non-affluent homes, the way that it would work is that you would practice the same custom, but oftentimes it was the children of the homeowner who would do this for the guests, or the guests themselves would do it, or in very rare cases, the owner of the home, the master of the home, would do it themselves for the guests. So this was a custom that Jesus and his followers were well aware of. What's distinct here is when it happens. It is almost certain that on the night of the Passover, the night before Jesus' crucifixion, the events that are recorded right here in the Gospel of John chapter 13, they'd already washed their feet. They'd already shown up at this rented room to observe Passover, and upon entering the home or the room that they were renting, they would have all done this already. Their feet were already clean. They already smelled of lilac and perfume. And so there in the middle of this sacred feast, this serious religious observance, Jesus does something completely unexpected. He gets up and he begins to wash his disciples' feet. This would have completely taken them aback. Now, if you want to get the image in your mind, don't think of a long table around which you'd have a bunch of chairs stationed. This is not how they ate in ancient Israel, or ancient anywhere for that matter. You need to think of a much lower table that might have only been a foot off the ground, 18 inches off the ground, and everyone is reclining at the table. They're propped up on an elbow, and they're eating while they're reclining. Who knew you could do that? Sounds like a great idea to me. When I get home, I'm going to saw the legs off of my kitchen table. We can all eat while we nap. This is their custom. This is what they did. So now you can see it in your mind. Jesus stands up from very likely the head of the table, where the leader of this band of religious disciples was eating. He stands up, he takes off his coat, he ties the towel around his waist, he gets a basin of warm water, some oils, some perfumes, and he starts to work his way around the table, washing the bare feet of the disciples who are reclining there. And then he gets to Peter. And you always know when Peter shows up in any one of the four Gospels in your Bible, something great's about to happen. Something funny, something stupid, something courageous. If you don't love any other character in the Bible, you need to love Peter, because Peter's like all of us. And Jesus gets to Simon Peter. And Peter says what everybody else is in the room thinking. He just doesn't have a very long connection between his brain and his mouth. And so things just blurt out. And so he says, Jesus, what on earth are you doing? Why would you wash my feet? And Jesus said, you don't know what I'm doing now, but after you will understand. Kind of cryptic. And Peter responds to Jesus, you will never wash my feet. Now, before you're too hard on Peter here, Peter has more than at least one leg to stand on in saying that to Jesus. Jesus was his rabbi, which means in that day and time, his esteemed religious teacher, his religious mentor, his pastor, kind of, sort of. Peter held Jesus in the utmost respect. In that day and time, a rabbi in any synagogue in first century Israel would have never done this for his followers, ever. So not only was this the first time that foot washing occurred right there in the middle of the Passover feast, this is also the first time in recorded history that a rabbi, a quote-unquote spiritual superior, would stoop and do this for his students or his followers. That's why Peter says to him, you are never going to touch my feet and wash them. You are above this, Jesus. Jesus replies to Simon Peter and says, unless I wash you, you will have no share with me, meaning you will have no part of me. If you don't let me do this, you and I will not be close. You and I will not be attached. And so Peter, in true fashion to Peter, says, well, in that case, don't stop with my feet. You can turn that bowl over my head, and you can leave me wringing wet, because being close to you matters to me so very much. We skip forward a couple of verses in the chapter, and we read that after Jesus had washed their feet, he put his robe back on, and he returned to the table. Pause. There are at least 12 disciples in the room. It is very likely there are more than that. You could easily have 30 people, 40 people in the room, men, women, children gathered around this table. Here's why I mention that. I want you to put yourself in the place of those disciples. How long do you think it took for one person, Jesus, to wash the feet of 12, 20, 30, 40 people? This was a long object lesson, yes? This could have taken 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour and a half. I don't know. If you were in that room as a follower of Jesus, what would have been going through your mind for those 45 minutes? As you watch your rabbi, your trusted teacher, the person to whom you had committed your entire life, go around the table and wash everyone's feet at a time that it had never been done before, and as a teacher who for the first time in the history of Israel would stoop to do this kind of thing. Can you imagine the dissonance that would be going on inside of you? Part of you would be spellbound by it. Part of you would be turned off by it. You wouldn't know how to interpret it. After Jesus finishes, Jesus says to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord. That would be rabbi, spiritual leader. You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right. That's what I am. So if I, who are your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. I have set an example for you, so that you also should do as I have done to you. Very truly, I say to you, servants are not greater than their masters, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. And then he ends with this. It will be a phrase we return to. If you know these things, you are blessed if you actually do them. What do you think Jesus was trying to get across on this very last night of his life to his followers that evening? Now, look, these are like famous last words, right? They say that you should always listen to the last words of any famous person because they tend to encapsulate what that person is all about, or what they really think is important enough to say to you with their last breath. This passage qualifies. This is on the last night of Jesus' life, and he thought it important enough to do this, to break tradition, to upset the apple cart of the Passover feast in order to get this point across. What do you think the point of the foot washing was and is to Jesus' followers? First, very simply, I think this must be fairly obvious. The grittiest kind of service or work is not beneath the best of us, because it wasn't beneath Jesus. All right, here's Jesus. Jesus, in fact, explicitly said this. You call me Lord and teacher. You esteem me as this religious or spiritual teacher or leader to whom you've entrusted your life, and he says you're right. That's exactly who I am. Now listen up. If I, who you esteem to be so great, am willing to do this kind of menial task, then you need to be willing to do the same thing for each other. That means several things. Number one, there is nothing. There is nothing that is beneath you. Nothing. Because there was nothing beneath Jesus. I don't know what the people around you in your family need. I don't know what the people at your workplace need. I don't know what your friends need. Here's what I do know. Whatever they need, it's not beneath you. Even if you're a suburbanite, even if you make 3 times the money that your coworker does, even if you think you're too educated to stoop that low to do whatever they need, I got news for you. It wasn't beneath Jesus. It shouldn't be beneath you. In fact, it seems like Jesus is saying the more overlooked, the more underappreciated, the more marginal, the more menial the task is, the more you of all people should be willing to say, I'll do that. Let me just go ahead and tell you that churches all over the world would be transformed if their people would just follow this. If they would just say, yep, you can count on me for that. I don't care what it is. I live to serve. I live to do the things that other people may not do. That's me. You can count on me because that's who Jesus was. And so therefore, that's who I am. Jesus wants us to serve one another in that way. What do you think the little, seemingly insignificant things are that you can do in the lives of the people that God has already placed around you? Things maybe that other people wouldn't do because they're too off-putting or they're too beneath other people. What could you do? Right, the coworker at work that nobody likes, guess what? It's not beneath you. The kid in your home that your spouse has the hardest time communicating with or disciplining, guess what? It is not beneath you to step in and help time after time after time after time. It is not beneath you to befriend people and entrust yourself to people who are less educated than you or poorer than you. It is not beneath you because it wasn't beneath Jesus. You could say, I think, based on this passage, that one of the truly distinct or unique characteristics of Christian people is that of all people on the face of the planet, we will be the ones who say, nothing is beneath us. Nothing. Doesn't stop there. The most intriguing verse in this passage to me is something that Jesus says to Peter early on. And the point of that verse that we'll look at again here in a second is very simply this. Serving one another unites us together in a way that very little else can. Do you remember Jesus saying this to Peter? Jesus gets to Peter's place at the table and wants to wash his feet, and Peter says to Jesus, "You will never wash my feet." And Jesus says this in reply, "Unless I wash your feet, Peter, you will have no part of me. You will have no share with me. You and I will not be attached. You and I will not be glued together, Peter, unless you let me wash your feet." Jesus spent his entire life serving his followers, teaching them, caring for them, solving their disputes, leading this little ragtag group of somewhere between 12 and 50, maybe 100 people all over ancient Israel, making sure their needs were met, making sure everybody's getting along, making sure that Casual Friday is observed. He spent his entire life taking care of those who followed him, and he was about to up the ante because he was about to go the extra mile. He was about to go exponentially further. He was about to die for them 24 hours later. This is what it meant for Jesus to serve his followers. And he says, if you don't let me serve you, you will have no part of me. I wonder if the same thing is true for us. I wonder if one of the things that unites people together, one of the things that coheres people together, one of the things that sticks people together the most is when they serve one another and are served by one another. Maybe you, like many Americans, feel very alone. Maybe you feel like there's almost nobody in your life who knows you, who cares about you, who will listen to you and let you be irrational and angry, and they will not try to mute you when you do. Maybe you do not feel like you have anybody like that. Maybe you come here or to another church week after week after week, and you just don't feel connected to somebody. Maybe you feel a drift between you and your spouse at home. Let me suggest that if Jesus is right, one of the key antidotes to your problem is service. To serve and to be served. Because there is no greater human glue than that. To serve and to be served. You want to be close to people? Find out how you can serve that person. And the more you learn somebody, be it somebody at work or somebody in your house or a friend that you have, the more that you learn them, if you're observant and you pay attention, the more you'll figure out how you can serve them individually, specifically, particularly. Because they're not like everybody else. They may have different things that they need from you. And there will be nothing better for the relationship you have or are trying to build than doing that. But I hasten to add, most Christian people are comfortable with the concept of serving. They are abjectly uncomfortable with the idea of being served. Ask a Christian person to give, they're very likely to do it to some degree. Ask a Christian person to receive, they are very likely going to politely say no thanks. Because it takes more humility and vulnerability to be served or to receive than it ever did to serve. And the truth is, the reason you might feel distant or disconnected from the people around you is that you are not willing to take from them. We think that all the kingdom of Jesus needs, All the world needs is more people who will be givers. That may well be true. Let me assure you that the other thing the world needs, the other thing this church needs, is people who are takers. People who say, I will take the risk of being open to you. I will take the risk of knowing that I need you. And that I need you to do for me what I cannot do for myself. I need you to serve me. I need to be served by you. I don't just need to give to you, I need to receive from you. And it is in that exchange, serving and being served, that lives are united together in a way that almost nothing else can do it. This is what Jesus was driving at when he washed the disciples' feet. And Jesus ends his little lesson that night in the upper room in Jerusalem with a single sentence that's recorded in verse 17 of John chapter 13. And the point of it is very simply this: serving one another, many of us know these things, but we are only blessed if we actually do them. Do you remember this verse? This is how Jesus ended this lesson about serving each other. He says to his followers that night, if you know these things, great, but you are really only blessed if you actually do them. Here's what I suspect. I suspect that especially for the church people in the room or Christian people in the room, the subject matter of this series is not new to you. In fact, it's even possible that the three passages we've covered from Matthew 20, Luke 12, and John 13 are not new to you. In fact, it's even possible that everything I've said in the last 3 weeks you've heard before. It's possible. So here's my question to you. What on earth are you going to do about it? Because that was Jesus' question that night. His disciples had heard him talk about this subject matter a lot over their 3 years with him. It was a favorite of his. It came up all the time. It's not like the idea of serving the way that Jesus served was new to their ears that night. They'd heard it a lot before. And so Jesus, ever the wise teacher, ended the lesson by saying, here's the deal. You may know these things, but you are really only blessed if you actually do them. So what do you think the truth about your life is? Not what you might say to somebody else, not the appearance or the faux finish that you would like to give off to other people. But if somebody were to get into the nitty-gritty of your life, would they find out about you that you lived day after day in settings across your life intent on being the greatest servant in each setting? That you were always willing to serve other people and prioritize their needs, to live your life focused on them and not you, that you were willing to give, that you were willing to do what other people around you would not do. Do you think they would find that spirit, that attitude infused in you as you went about your life? This is what Jesus wanted. He wanted his mission on earth to birth a group of people who, among other things, were deeply committed to the principle of servanthood. And to actually doing it. To the people you already know. The people who are right there around you. To find your own personal identity. To find your self-esteem in how you serve. I wonder. I'm going to go ahead and be honest with you. One of the things that spooks me as a pastor, this is one of the things that, if I'm not careful, it's an anxiety that I carry with me all the time. Want to know what it is? It's how you're going to respond to stuff. Let me tell you exactly what I mean. There are things that I, or working with the steering team, we will see that we know our church needs to get better at, or maybe places that we're excited to go. But you know what it's dependent upon? You. And when I stay awake the most at night, it's when I think about myself, man, I am a terrible leader. And the reason I'm a terrible leader is that more people aren't doing the stuff that we really need people to do. Or they just don't seem engaged. Or they just don't seem intent on going on this love your neighbor adventure with us, or serving one another in the way that Jesus described today. These are the things, honest to God, these are the things that give me sleepless nights. And I'm not the only one, by the way. Granted, I might be more neurotic than most pastors, I'll give you that. But I assure you I'm not the only one of my kind who really cares about what we're trying to create together and worries about the follow-through. We are blessed if we actually do what we know to do. And in this case, what Jesus meant is to serve. This is a great passage for us to actually put some hands and feet to. There are, in most Christian traditions, there are two things that we call sacraments. Sacrament is something that is a very special religious or spiritual practice. And in most Christian traditions, it's baptism and communion for two different reasons. But there's a minority of Christian groups who actually have three sacraments. They add a third. And they say that this third action is just as important, it's just as meaningful as baptism and communion. You know what it is? Foot washing. And just like we every few months will pause and have communion together, or once or twice a year we'll baptize infants and adults, you know what? Every so often, maybe every month, maybe every other month, in these churches, you know what they do? They pause to wash one another's feet. You know why? Because it speaks to who Christian people are trying to be. It speaks to this luminary passage from John chapter 13 about serving one another and nothing being beneath us. That's why they do it. That's why we're going to do it today. You're going to get the chance to do what Jesus did for one another. You're going to get the chance to actually put it into motion. Not because it's just like a different thing to do in church, but because I hope that now you know the story, as you do this for someone else, or someone else does it for you, you're now going to remember what Jesus was driving at. You're going to remember what it was like for those disciples way back when to experience this for themselves when Jesus interrupted dinner and washed their feet. This has the potential to be, for all of us who do it, a very meaningful spiritual event or practice that we're about to do together. So let me describe what I've done. I've set up around this half of the gym 10 different foot washing stations. There's 3 over here, there's 3 over here, and there's 4 up front. And in a minute, I'm going to turn you loose, and there's going to be a video that plays on a loop. And what I'd like you to do, if you're comfortable, is I'd like you to wash somebody's feet, and I'd like you to let them wash your feet. It could be somebody you're in a small group with, somebody you serve with in a ministry, somebody you know and who's a good friend. Doesn't matter. At each station, you'll find there's a bucket of water. There are some cloth towels that you can use to wash one another's feet. There's also a roll of paper towels to dry one another's feet. You will find there is an empty bucket for you to put the used cloths and towels in. There's also hand sanitizer for all the germaphobes in the office, in the room today. Okay? So, if you don't want to do it, that's totally fine. You can go get coffee, or you can hang out in the chairs and watch the video, no problem. I would love for you to, at the end of this series about service, and as we talk about this extraordinary passage in John 13, I'd love for you maybe to put in motion and go through the steps that Jesus himself and the disciples actually did and see what it's like. So, text in the back, why don't you roll the video for me? You guys can get up and find someone that you would like to do this with, and there are 10 stations, and we'll pause for a minute, and when I see that things are wrapping up, we'll move forward in the service, okay? So go ahead and roll the video, and you guys can get started.